Hi, this is Mark Bernard, and I'm here to talk about cybersecurity and strategic partnerships, specifically with my company, Secure Knowledge Management Incorporated. This is an executive briefing, so this will be a very short video, and I'm going to talk about some very fundamental, important points of interest that a lot of executives and boards are talking about today. Okay? First of all, normally I get asked 3 questions when I am presenting to executives. They expect the answers to these questions, okay? What exposure or pain are you going to be able to take out of my work life or my business and reduce risk within the organization? Well, we can reduce risks associated with daily operations, supply chain, and service providers. And we do that by implementing the ISO 27001, which I happen to be an expert on. And I've done it in government and in the commercial sector, as well as banking. The second question I usually get asked is, what is the impact on my organization? What impact will your project have on the organization's overall culture? Because cultures are very sensitive things with organizations. It's what makes an organization successful or not successful. And of course, executives are very nervous about somebody coming in and implementing changes, like a bull in a china shop, as they say, and disrupting the culture and upsetting people. So I can guarantee you that my approach, my company's approach, has zero negative impact. In fact, it's been regarded to as a seamless integration process. We take our time to evaluate the organization, to see what the culture is all about, and then we build a customized implementation process around that won't disrupt. Instead, it actually is designed to empower managers and enable and engage employees so that they can participate in the program. This makes it more sustainable, more likely to be successful and reach its goals. The third question I often get asked is, how much is this going to cost, right? If I answer the first 2 questions correctly, then the third question is less of an issue, but more of a check and balance approach, okay? Normally, implementation of the ISO 27001 costs, on average, about $50,000. It runs for about 3 months, and then it's done. And there's either a handoff to an internal group of people, or else they outsource it, or they hire somebody else to run it for them. The steady state of the in-house system will depend on the salary and benefits of the employee who gets assigned the responsibility to oversee the management, the cybersecurity framework, and the management system that's involved in that. And of course, if you want to outsource it, you can outsource the whole thing to my company for $50K a year. Now, the third point of interest is because this is a certification, it is audited by the ISO organization independently, and they're registers. So they charge a fee for coming in and doing audits. You can do them either semi-annual or annually, and on average, they cost around $13,000 a year. Now, what is the big issue here? What is the risk involved here, and what is the return on that investment? Okay, well, the risk is potential breach. Okay, a breach costs almost $4 million to fix, and that's just an average breach. Some breaches are a lot more expensive than that. If you look at the recent Equifax breach, for instance, it's going to cost them $700 million. Okay, now for most organizations, that will wipe them out. They would have to go Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Okay, so that's the big risk. All right, every organization is probably going to be breached eventually, if it hasn't already been, and the company doesn't know about it. However, if you implement a framework like ISO 27001 for a modest fee of $50K, you can get a quick return on it, because ISO 27001 will not only mitigate risk, it'll eliminate some of the risk completely from your organization, the way it's designed. Okay, this reduces the potential impact of a breach to about $345,000. Which by most standards, if you have cybersecurity insurance, is very reasonable. It can be handled easily by their insurance policy. Now, the cost to implement the program, as I mentioned, starts around $50K. I put a range of $50,000 to $275,000, just because some of the organizations that I work with are hundreds of thousands of employees, and they have hundreds or thousands of branches. So it is quite time consuming. It's a big deal. It's a big project, but on average, on a small organization, it's about $50K. Very good return on investment. And how much do you budget for it each year? So that's another question that comes up. The cost to maintain a formal information security program is between 1% and 18% of the IT budget. So that's, again, very modest fee. Most of the IMIT people, ICT people are already doing security work of some sort. Okay, so it's just a matter of earmarking the work that they do and the tasks that they do and pulling that into the bucket under cybersecurity and saying, okay, here's what we do on an annual basis. Plus, here's this new stuff from this program. Okay, so what are some of the business benefits, okay, of implementing a cybersecurity framework like ISO 27001? Okay, so the first one is its flexibility, because I've implemented it for organizations that have 8 employees, and I've implemented it for organizations that have tens of thousands of employees. It's very flexible. It can fit any organization. It doesn't matter what industry you're in. You could be in government or commercial sector. It's scalable. As I mentioned before, 8 employees to 100,000, it doesn't matter. I've worked on ISO 27000 projects for Ma Bell, who has hundreds of thousands of employees, for instance, okay? So, and I've also worked on it for some small organizations that are startups, but they require the certification in order to attract investors and to give shareholders confidence that they have security in place to protect their data. It's non-prescriptive. So the way that the ISO framework works, it's based on a risk management backbone. And you assess risk based on the organization and its risk tolerances and risk appetite. And then you implement changes that mitigate those risks. It's evidence-based. So you could actually go at any time of the day or hour or week or month, and you can collect evidence that proves that the program is running. Okay, it's that efficient. It's not a point-in-time system. It's continually operating once it's been implemented after that 12-week period. It also works as an excellent compliance framework. Now, I've been a compliance manager, compliance assessment and reporting in the government for 19 ministries, 23,000 employees. I've also been a compliance manager in banking. I can tell you that there isn't an easier framework to implement that will deal with all your legal obligations, whether they're regulatory obligations or whether they are contractual obligations. For instance, the privacy framework, the IAPPP, is based on ISO 27001. PCI based on 27001. 27001 is the grandfather. It's been around since about 1995. It was created by the UK government because they were having trouble with their vendors and suppliers in the supply chain following security standards of the government. So obviously it's been designed right from the very beginning to address a lot of the regulatory compliance. And again, you can't get a more cost-effective compliance framework for $50K a year to be able to prove that you're compliant all the time. You just can't buy that anywhere. Okay, internationally accepted. So ISO 27001, as I mentioned, started out with the UK, but then it was adopted in 2005 by the International Standards Organization and harmonized with 9001, the quality management system. So it's internationally accepted. There's thousands, tens of thousands of registrations and certifications around the globe. Malaysia has some of the most, for instance, in Asia. There's quite a few in North America. There's a lot in Europe. You can go anywhere on the planet and find a 27001 certified organization because it's an international standard framework. Okay, again, I talked about the 12-week return on investment. You can't buy a compliance framework that addresses all these cybersecurity risks for any cheaper than to implement ISO 27001. So it's an excellent, excellent return on investment. It's definitely the one that I would recommend for any organization, no matter what industry you're in. Okay, what is the risk? Okay, up to now, it's been mostly operational risk, some compliance risk issues, and maybe a touch of hazard risk. But recently, the massive breach of Equifax has created a whole brand new set of strategic risks and financial risks for organizations. Thanks to Equifax, they've set a new standard for how risks are managed and quantified within an organization. Some of the things that happened to Equifax, for instance, their financial forecast was downgraded. They got a poor credit rating from Moody's. It's kind of ironic. They're a credit organization. Now they have bad credit. And how does that affect an organization financially and strategically? Well, if you're planning on building new parts or new technology, or if you're planning on investing in markets and you need to borrow money from the bank, well, guess what? It's going to cost you more money now, and you're going to make less revenue. So it's very, very important. And unfortunately, cybersecurity threats are now affecting top enterprise risk management frameworks. Also, in addition to this and the reputational damage that they absorbed, they also have to pay $700 million to fix the problem, all because one vulnerability wasn't patched. So how important is it to have an evidence-based framework that addresses cybersecurity? Just ask Equifax. Now, some of the costs associated with repairing breaches, it's based on a per record basis. Breaches aren't the only thing to be concerned. Ransomware is also on the rise, and it's even probably more devastating, because at least if there's a breach, you still have access to data normally. But if it's a ransomware attack, you lose access to your data. Your customers may lose access to the services that you're providing to them. So it's a huge impact on your reputation of your organization. And you can see at the very top, healthcare, 233 US per record to repair, and at the bottom, retail, 78. Now, financial records used to be the choice of most cyber threats, but now they're really targeting healthcare because of the way the healthcare system is structured, the way that it's easy to pretend that you have some procedures that need to be taken care of, and you can write basically doctor's orders and then get a check right away. So it's extremely vulnerable. It needs to be overhauled. But in the meantime, here's some of the costs associated with different industries and repairing risk or repairing damage to your customers' records. Now, I can tell you from my own experience working with IBM on their red team for 2 years that 60% of all cybersecurity threats are actually known. So these are the ones that you buy antivirus software that actually looks at the data flow and the packets coming into your system and detects certain signatures and patterns, and then it responds to those. Only 60%, okay? You hear a lot about Chinese hackers and Russian hackers and the skills that they have. We have very skilled hackers here, and part of our red team job was to hack into organizations of our sister company in order to make sure that she was protecting the records of her customers. And I can tell you, probably 9 times out of 10, we could get in. Okay, so having a red team is very important in order to test your security, provide some sort of assurance over it. But getting back to the main point here is 40% of the opportunities that we had in attack vectors are not even talked about. They're not even discussed. Okay, because when we were doing red team testing, there were no tools. We built our own tools. We researched the operating systems that we were attacking and the software that was loaded on those systems. We researched the protocols and the networks. We found gaps. There's lots of gaps, okay, because none of these industries are regulated. None of them actually have any quality standards that reflect on cybersecurity. Now, how do you get rid of some of those things? Well, you have to have a formal program. You have to have a program that addresses things like monitoring for anomalies, okay? But if you don't have a steady baseline, you can't monitor for anomalies. It's not possible, okay? So having this program in place is fundamental in order to be successful. You do threat hunting. So you inspect your systems. You inspect maybe a threat intelligence system that you've put out in your DMZ that's gathering data. You do heuristic analysis. You detect certain patterns and odd activity on the network, and then you investigate it. Okay? You do threat intelligence integration and orchestration. So you automate as much as you can because systems are getting faster. We're getting into the quantum computing era. And when that happens, humans will be less in control and the computers will be in more control. And now we also have artificial intelligence as well getting involved. So there's a lot of things that are going on that are changing the landscape of the threats. But only 60% are known, 40% wide open. Now the international standard, ISO 27001, is what I'm here to talk about. How economically it is to implement such a framework in such a short period of time and get some value out of it right away. It's based on two sets of controls within the same framework. Oftentimes when I audit organizations, I see Annex A implemented perfectly. So that's 113 controls. Usually it's handed over to the information technology people, and they understand the objectives of each of the controls. They implement it very well. Okay. The one that's less implemented properly is the management system, and it's actually the most important. So the way that the framework works is that the management system controls, 148, are mandatory. Those have to be in place. Okay. Context of the organization, leadership, planning, support, operation, performance evaluation, and improvement. All those control points, and each control point is built to address a specific risk within a business process. So those controls have to be implemented. Annex A are what we call discretionary. So depending on your organization, you may have e-commerce, for instance, you may not. So if there's controls around e-commerce, you may have not implemented them. You may not need to, okay? But it's risk justified. So Annex A, you run your risk assessment, you look at your information assets, and you determine whether or not you have any sort of exposure. And if you do, then you implement the controls. 261 control points in total. That's very modest compared to some frameworks, I can tell you right now. If you look at the NIST 853-4, it has 909 control points. If you look at the PCI SSD, it has over 1,000 control points. Okay, that's a lot. So when you look at control points as a senior manager or executive, you look at dollar value. Okay, because what's going to happen is for every control point or set of control points you implement, you're going to implement new processes. Those new processes need to be maintained. That means you need to hire new people, right, to manage those processes. So if you can get away with 261 control points and manage your cybersecurity program effectively, obviously that would be your right decision. I built this reference model based on my implementations of ISO 27001. It's beautiful. It helps to explain security architecture, the governance process, the risk management process, vulnerability management, compliance management, as well as the communication strategy. So important. Awareness training, access and identity, asset management, and then down the side we have to control records because we need to have that evidence anytime one of our clients or a potential investor asks, or a regulatory body. We need to be able to produce the evidence to say, you know what, we're compliant, we did what we said we were going to do, and here's the evidence to back it up. Also, there's monitoring. So monitoring is so fundamental, and I just talked about some of the threats that you can't actually monitor for unless you have some kind of an active program where you're doing threat intelligence work. So important. Monitoring has to happen all the time. We use security information event management systems. We use intrusion detection systems, intrusion prevention systems, intrusion host systems. There's a lot of different types of monitoring out there that can be integrated together to give you a complete and accurate picture of what your infrastructure looks like so that you can determine if there's any kind of a threat within your organization. And then, of course, there's internal audit and external audit. And this is an important step as well, because auditors report to the board of directors. They provide assurance over the program that's been implemented. They can tell the senior managers objectively, because they're not directly involved in the process, whether or not it's working properly, whether or not it needs to be fixed. Okay, so there's a lot of people out there implementing cybersecurity programs. Some of them don't know actually what they're doing. They don't have all the right processes in those programs. And ISO 27001 will help guide them, or guide you if you determine that you want to implement such a program. The program takes 12 weeks. Here's an example of a pencil chart done in the style of project management. The number of activities that you have to go through in order to implement, reporting completed projects or tasks, pardon me, and identifying the risk areas. This is a very simple approach. It's all based on the Project Management Institute methodology. So initiating the process, planning the process, and then executing it. All this time you're controlling the entire process from the center. Okay, and then finally the closeout, and that's when you wrap it up, when you're running into the last week 11 and week 12, and you're winding down the project. You're getting registered and certified. You're getting ready to kick it off and hand it over to operations. Very straightforward. Now, an important part, probably not discussed enough in the 27001, but I'm going to share it with you because of my experience, and I know that Communication is probably 30% of the solution. If you don't communicate the right messages to the right people, you're not going to get them engaged. You need to get everybody engaged in the process. You need to resolve any kind of issues. Normally, when an organization goes through any sort of digital transformation, there's going to be people who are in denial. Some are angry. Some are trying to bargain their way back to what it was like before there was change being implemented. And then finally, they kind of give in and they say, okay, well, there's nothing we can do about it, so now we need to move on. So then they accept it, and then they start to support it. So the complete communication strategy that I've designed and implement works along the same kind of line. So I brief managers who have employees before we have any discussions with employees. The managers already have all the answers, for instance. Okay, they can detect an employee who comes up and at what stage they are in the change process, the digital transformation, so they know what the messaging is. We're very consistent across the process, and it works. Trust me, I've seen it and I've executed it many, many times. Also, we talked about evidence being gathered. Okay, I've designed this workflow and the different databases that we collect information in. You could automate this process if you wanted. You don't have to. But here's how it works, okay? So you have statutory and regulatory contractual obligations. They get mapped into your statement of applicability, and then you create a conformity matrix from that. That's what you give to the ISO people along with your audit information. Your assets have to be mapped into that because you don't just implement controls for the sake of implementing controls like in some frameworks, like in the CSC 20, okay, for instance. It's not about just implementing controls, okay? That's a really not a very positive approach to take. You need to find the information asset. You need to find out what the risk is that that asset is exposed to, and then you need to implement controls around that, okay? And that's what this system is really designed to do, okay? And then you do health checks and you do audits, and then from that you build corrective and preventative action plans. If they exceed your risk appetite, then they get treated immediately in a risk treatment plan. If they fall below the risk appetite, then what happens is they get added into a roadmap for continuous improvement, and they get picked up as new projects come on board, and the security manager says, hey, that project's going to touch this area and change it, or maybe it's the governance committee that you assemble. They say, hey, we have a new project coming up, it's going to touch on this area. We can address those risks at the same time. So this keeps the cost of the program down. Okay, so it's not millions of dollars to run this program. It's actually very, very efficient. Again, everything is a project. So at the end of the day, when this project is winding down, one of the most important artifacts that you're going to get is you're going to have a tactical and strategic cybersecurity business plan. Okay, so all the work that we've done, all the projects that we've done, it's all going to be mapped into everything as a project kind of approach. And then that's going to be mapped to the strategic mission of the organization, as well as the goals, the performance metrics, the critical success factors. Those are all going to be mapped to the cybersecurity activities in the program. And this gives you a really great way of managing this on a formal basis as a senior manager. So if you're a chief information security officer or a chief data protection officer, this is the approach that you want. This is the document that you want, because you're going to be meeting with the board and they're going to want to know at a very high level, are you meeting your targets? And if you're not, what risks are you exposed to, and how can they help to mitigate those risks? Now, how can we help? My company, I built just to support people who are in the process of implementing cybersecurity programs. I can help you in a number of different ways. And let's talk about that a little bit. Okay, first of all, experience. I've managed over 117 projects myself. Some of them are regional, some of them are national, some of them are international. Okay, a number of different industries, financial systems, government, manufacturing, technology, cloud computing, healthcare, pharmaceutical, transportation. I've done a lot of different projects. I've been very blessed, and I'm thankful for my experience. And now I'm trying to share that with people so that they can build better cybersecurity programs. Number of my customers, very big customers, very big organizations. Recently, just about 3 years ago, I was actually the cybersecurity program lead for Morgan Stanley account, okay, on NTT. NTT's account, Morgan Stanley was the customer. I'm talking about running an information risk program, a cybersecurity program for a Fortune 50 organization. Very well done. Lots of information and intelligence there to share and experience, as well as the other many projects that I worked on with EDS and Trimble and the most technologically savvy photronics, building nanoparticles, helping them to implement an enterprise security program. JBill, technology people, IBM, some of the biggest names in the industry. I've worked with them and helped them. I have a lot of experience to share, and you can benefit from that. My company provides basically 4 types of services. Okay, we provide education to help people get their skills up to speed if that's what they need. We also provide the materials if they're building their own program and they don't have time to assemble all the policies, procedures, and standards, or the risk assessment matrix, or any of the security architecture, any of the other documentation. We can help with that area because we have it, we've done it, we've been there before. We can also be your consultant. We can be on call. We can be on retainer. If you're a small organization, you don't have the budget to have a full-time employee, you need a security manager, a security auditor, you can outsource that to us. We can help you. Okay? And then finally, outsourcing the whole organization, the whole process of cybersecurity for your organization. We can also help with that. We can monitor your networks to see if there are any threats. And then we have incident response teams who can take care of those incidents for you. We can provide reports to the senior management so that when they get asked by their shareholders or the board of directors or the deputy ministers, that they have an answer. Okay? We're very professional. We know what we're doing, and we can help you. Here's my contact information. Feel free to give us a call. We would love to come and talk to you about what your cybersecurity project is looking like and how we can help you. I thank you for your time, and God bless you and have a great day.